make sure I can get a feel from the I just want to make sure that I can get a feel from the room to know if there's anything specifically that you all are looking to get out of this presentation, anything related to domestic violence or sexual violence that you're wanting to learn today. Feel free to either come off chat or come off mute or write in the chat if you have any questions or if there's any content area that you want us to cover today. Well, if not, definitely feel free to write in the chat or come off mute at any point during this conversation. We like to keep it a little bit more discussional. So some people are writing in the chat. Okay, so resources for families and support for victims. We're absolutely going to cover that a lot today. So we will definitely get to that. And how to identify violence when a person is hiding it. Danielle, is that something you're going to speak on during your portion?
I can go over red flags, which pretty much is that.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we will definitely get to both of those questions. But again, if anything does come up as we're going through, if anything isn't clear, please feel free to jump in. All right. Okay. So who we are. SERV is the Sexual Violence Crisis Center for Camden, Gloucester, and Cumberland counties. We also do domestic violence services in Gloucester and Cumberland and human trafficking services in Gloucester, Camden, and Cumberland County. So that being said, I know your program is kind of spread throughout all of South Jersey. So it is important for you all to know that there is a designated service provider for all three of these victimizations in each county in New Jersey. So we will definitely get the New Jersey statewide hotlines out to you by the end of this presentation in case you are not in any of those counties. Pretty much all these services work in the same way. So you can kind of transfer this to each program. There are, differences here and there, but if anything does come up specifically in reference to your county, feel free to bring it up. All right, so our program is trauma informed and obviously trauma focused. So what that means is we really try to structure our program in a way to make people feel safe. We recognize that, of course, people are coming to us because, they are experiencing a trauma, whether that's sexual violence, human trafficking, domestic violence. But we also recognize that most people have a history of trauma even before this initial trauma that they're coming in to see us for. So we really try to empower our clients by giving them information, prioritizing their consent. We're not making decisions for anyone. We are not telling anyone what to do. We try to be culturally sensitive and prioritize physical and emotional safety. We always strive to be strength focused and use those strengths to help clients in their safety plan or, in ways that they're healing from their trauma. And we also prioritize trust and transparency. Our program also strives to be inclusive and anti-oppressive. So, this is work that we are constantly striving towards. We have not reached perfection with this yet. I don't know if that's possible to ever reach perfection with this type of work, but we do try to make our program accessible to all communities, all marginalized communities. And that's an ongoing process for us. So our human trafficking services, I am not going to speak on this too much today because I do believe that our human trafficking team is providing a presentation for, okay, and Beth is agreeing. Yeah, so they also have resources on our website, which we have a link to at the end of this presentation that has like on-demand presentations that you can watch from our human trafficking team. But human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. So the services that we offer include case management, advocacy, crisis intervention, counseling, and emergency shelter. Okay. So first, we're going to focus on our sexual violence services and just different things to keep in mind. If this does come up with any of the communities, individuals, families that you're working with. So our sexual violence services include advocacy, counseling, and case management. So advocacy is essentially going with survivors, accompanying them to different legal, medical proceedings that are related to the trauma. For example, anytime a survivor in the state of New Jersey is going into the police station to report a sexual assault, they have the legal right to have an advocate there with them. And that advocate's role is really to just be an emotional support to them, to help them talk about what they want to do in a confidential space, in a space where they know they're in control of that information and it's not going to go any further. And then also, we can be in there with them just to make sure that whole process goes smoothly, help them navigate that, keep them grounded, and, just make sure that they're treated with respect and that their rights are maintained. We also provide counseling. So all of our services, I don't think I mentioned this already, are completely free. Nothing goes through insurance. Everything is funded through grants. So the counseling that we provide is absolutely free. There's no need for insurance. There's no need for legal documentation. We're able to really provide our services to all. And we do work with anyone who is over the age of 13. So 13 is the youngest that we're able to work with, but then, there's no discrimination past that. And then case management would be really just helping link the individual with any services that they might need, whether that is looking for housing resources or whether that is just trying to figure out what their next moves are. If they're going to seek accountability, if they're going to report the assault, if they're going to seek a restraining order, whatever that may be. So I have this slide on here just to kind of say that we do not specifically only work with sexual assault victims or survivors. We work with the whole spectrum of sexual violence. So that can include things like sexual harassment. We also work with parents and spouses, partners of people who have experienced this harm. So, for example, the parent to a child who was molested, we can absolutely provide services to them. We actually had a support group for parents at one point. It has kind of fallen to the wayside, but we're hoping to get that started back up. But that's a really great space for us to be able to provide support to the person who is, providing support to the primary victim. And we also work with adults who were who experienced harm as children. There's no timeline on when someone can seek our services. Okay, and so anything that does not have consent, any form of sexual contact without consent, is sexual violence. So we define consent as a freely given and enthusiastic agreement between two people to engage in a particular sexual activity, which at any time can be revoked. So the keywords there are freely given, enthusiastic. I think, that's a great word to associate with sex, right? It should be a happy thing that people are excited to engage in. It's particular, right? We're not consenting to everything across the board. We're being specific about what we're consenting to, and people always have the right to revoke that permission. So just legally, conditions in which people can't consent sometimes in the state of New Jersey. All right, so sometimes a disability can prevent someone from being able to consent. Sometimes being under the influence would prevent someone from being able to consent. People who are underage are not able to consent. And of course, if someone is sleeping or unconscious, they are unable to consent. and the legal age of consent in New Jersey is 16. So what that means is once someone is 16, their ability to consent is legally recognized. However, from 13 to 15, there is a rule to where they can, they're able to give consent to someone who's no older than 4 years. So I think once it gets to 4 years, that becomes illegal. So within 3 years wouldn't be considered statutory rape, but once it gets to 4, it would. And then of course, anyone 12 and younger is not able to consent to anything at any time. And even if that individual is 16, but that person is a family member, a person in an authority to that adolescent, such as a teacher or a coach, then that 16 year doesn't apply. They would need to be 18 in order to consent to that person. Okay. And so just looking at some common responses to trauma, everyone reacts to trauma in different ways, but we do see, a lot of the same trends. And part of why I have this on here is because one of our major tasks as advocates is helping people normalize what they're experiencing. Experiencing a trauma is very frightening, right? And the aftermath of that, the emotional shock and feelings of numbness, or that hypervigilance, that anxiety that people experience can be very distressing to them, right? They might not fully understand why that's happening. They might feel like they're going crazy. They might doubt their own instincts. So we try to help normalize these symptoms for people, help teach them about how the brain works and, our fight, flight, or freeze, or what's the other one? Fight, flight, freeze, submit. There's more than just fight, flight, or freeze, but our brain responds to trauma in certain ways. And, it's not our rational decision when we are fighting off a perpetrator, when we're trying to protect our lives, protect our children. So, that is a big part of what we try to do. And I apologize, this is such a blurry image, but I did get this off of Therapist Aid, which is a great website if you're not familiar. But it kind of just breaks down those trauma responses into 4 different categories. So we have re-experiencing the trauma, avoiding the trauma. That might look like, numbing, using drugs or alcohol, just not talking about it. Very common response to trauma, having any negative thoughts or feelings, and then that hyper arousal, right? Being on edge, anxiety, inability to sleep, unable to concentrate. Okay. And so there is a relationship between how much trauma someone has experienced and the intensity of their symptoms. So we call this the trauma dose. So, experiencing trauma can look different for different people. All trauma, is severe. That's why we call it trauma. But if someone has ongoing complex trauma, if they experience something like domestic violence or human trafficking, child sexual abuse, those symptoms can often be more severe for people. Okay. So intersectionality is really important to keep in mind when talking about any of these forms of unwanted sexual contact, domestic violence, human trafficking, because it's not always the same experience for everyone, right? What it looks like for a young white female to report to the police is much different than what it might look like for a Black trans woman to report, especially if there's different factors going on there. What is that person's religion? Are they able to speak freely on, to an advocate even about wanting to leave their marriage? If that person's dealing with mental illness, is that bringing something into this process of reporting, or the police interpreting this person a certain way because of how they're acting? So just keeping that in mind is really important, especially as we go into talking about domestic violence and what people's rights and options are, whether they choose to seek those rights and options out or not. Okay. And I think this is the last slide that I have before we get into the domestic violence portion. But it's very important to keep in mind that anytime that a survivor discloses their victimization, their trauma to anyone, there's always an opportunity for us to continue that harm or to promote healing. So, we have to recognize that when someone opens up to us about that, that is a privilege. They trust us with that information. And so we really want to emphasize their control. We want to listen, we want to validate, we want to offer options if that's what they're interested in. But if it's not, we really want to keep our opinions to ourselves, avoid blaming or avoid minimizing their trauma or judging them. So it's, this is very important to keep in mind as we go through and we talk more about what rights and options exist for survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence.
Okay, I guess I'm up. Hi, everybody. I'm Danielle Brown. I am the Domestic Violence Response Team Coordinator for Gloucester County, formerly with Camden County for the past 5 years from the Women's Center there. And then 15 years before, I was a team leader for the volunteers. So I pretty much have been in the realm of domestic violence awareness for a very long time. And on top of that, I'm a survivor of domestic violence myself from a 10-year, very physically violent relationship, marriage with lots of kids. So what we're going to talk about today, I like to keep it pretty much open. So if you guys do have questions while we talk, please feel free to talk to me. I only have 30 minutes. So really, if you have anything you want to say, you can put it in the chat or just go off mute and say it to me while I'm talking. And I'll try to stick to the slides. So with SURF, we do have, every county has a designated DV agency like Alethea was talking about. And pretty much every county who has an agency means they have the safe house in the county. And our safe house for Gloucester County, it's a 30-day stay. They can get extensions if needed. We do help with housing and resources. And like I said, must be Gloucester or Cumberland County resident. And if they're not from this county and they call us, we refer to the next county. So if they're from Camden County and somebody calls us, we'll refer them over, unless they want to escape out of Camden County because the assailant's there, the perpetrator, we're pretty much good with, I say hiding them out, but they don't want to be in the county they're in because of safety reasons, then they can go to other counties. We have legal advocacy. So we have, if anybody has any legal questions, I'm really good with that, but we do legal advocacy. So we have court advocates that go to court for municipal hearings and for Superior Court. So Superior Court covers the restraining orders, right? That's where you go for your final restraining order. Now, if you I know I'm talking fast, but you can tell me to slow down. If you're going for a restraining order, if you guys don't know this, to get a temporary restraining order, you need two things. So you need a relationship with that person, which means it doesn't mean you have to be married, right? You can live together, you can be roommates, you can be a former roommate, be a spouse, a former spouse, have children in common, be pregnant, you can be pregnant with somebody's child. You have to have that relationship and you have to have an act. So what happened? Right. So there's 19 predicate acts. Like, for instance, there's assault, there's aggravated assault, simple assault, there's stalking, there's criminal mischief. There's a lot under the 19 predicate acts that will count. So when you go to the police station, which would be after hours or on the weekend, that's where you can file for a temporary restraining order. If it's Monday through Friday, I would say like 8:30 to 4, you will go to the Superior Court, to the Family Court Division. And you can file for your restraining order there. But they're going to look for those two things for that temporary restraining order: an act and one of those 19 predicate acts, and what's the relationship for you to be able to get a restraining order. Once that is approved and you get your temporary restraining order, you'll get a court date within, it used to be 7 to 10 days pre-COVID, but now it's a little bit longer. I'm not really sure how they're doing it now as far as time, but you'll get a court date for the final restraining order. You can bring an attorney, you don't have to. But we refer to South Jersey Legal. They're really good out here, or Legal Services of New Jersey, South Jersey. That's one of our resources. And most of the time, if you qualify, you get represented for free and you can get that person to come out with you. And then you go for the final restraining order. And in the final restraining order, you not only need the relationship, one of the 19 predicate acts, you also need what's the need? Why do you need this restraining order? You know, it doesn't mean you have to be like, I'm terrified of them. They're going to kill me. I'm scared to death. It doesn't have to be that absolute emergent, like some people think, but thank you, Claire. But, you know, there has to be a need. What is the need? Are they stalking you? Are they harassing you? You know, are you afraid of them? Or do you think they're going to kill you? That can happen. And the judge at the Superior Court will make that decision. Like I said, you don't have to have an attorney, but I always think it's better if you can get one for free, take the attorney, because if I can have an attorney and then the abuser shows up with an attorney and maybe pays $1,500 and I'm there by myself, they're going to eat you alive a lot of times. So it's good to have an attorney with you. And if we can help you with resources to get a free attorney, then go for that. We do advocacy. So at the hospital and police departments, we only go there. We do not go to a person's home or meet them at McDonald's. You know, we only report to police departments and hospitals. And that's when they activate our team. So which are volunteers or our caseworkers or, pretty much anybody who's on staff, they can be activated also. But we do have volunteers that do that. So I was gonna try to do a little promotion here. Does anybody want to be a volunteer? But you can absolutely contact us. I'm really looking for Gloucester County, but I know other people are in other counties. So, and after say somebody comes in from an activation, they get activated through DVRT, the Domestic Violence Response. So a volunteer goes out to the police department, meets with the victim, kind of like Alethea said, you're that shoulder, you're someone there, but you also, all of our volunteers are 60-hour trained. So they know everything about sexual violence, domestic violence, human trafficking, restraining orders. We overtrain them. So every time you go out, there's something different. So they'll be there with them. And then once they get that first encounter, that crisis moment, boots on the ground, let's keep you alive tonight. They also will do a follow-up with them, with our case managers, with our domestic violence advocates. And that's where they can do the workshops and the individual counseling, go over more resources, like more of a long-term, how can we help you? And that's part of the case management also. Did I do on slides? You can go to the next one. So I'm sure you guys have seen this before. If you haven't, this is just the cycle of violence. It's not used that much, but the courts, especially if you're trying to dismiss your restraining order, the judge will say, have you been explaining the cycle of violence? And the cycle of violence is pretty much what it looks like. Not all relationships go through the cycle of violence. Sometimes it's just all violence, right? But my marriage was the cycle of violence. Not that he ever bought flowers or anything, but there was a cycle where he would be nice and calm, but it would kind of build up. Little things would, I could see little red flags. Like I knew when he was going to explode soon. And then you'll have that explosion. And then after that is the honeymoon phase where like, I love you. I'm going to get counseling. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did that. My dad used to do this to my mom. I always said I was never going to do it. And then it just goes and repeats and repeats. It's the cycle. So domestic violence, also referred to as intimate partner violence, IPV, if you guys ever hear it referred to that way. Dating abuse or relationship abuse is a pattern of behaviors used by one partner to maintain power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. So to explain that even better, a lot of people think domestic violence as being like a black eye, right? Like somebody punched me or kicked me. It's that physical abuse that you see. But the meat and potatoes of domestic violence, to say it that way, is power and control. It's someone having power and control over another person, right? It's that uneven playing field where so I'm in a healthy relationship now, been married for 20 years to my second husband, and I'm not afraid, right, to say, why didn't you take out the trash? Or why didn't you do the laundry? Or why didn't you walk the dogs? Or, why, little things like that. I'm not afraid. There's no like eggshells that I have to walk on. Whereas my previous marriage, there was that. I was afraid to say those types of things. So that's that when I talk about domestic violence, like I said, it's not, people used to see this big billboard on the wall where, driving down the highway and you would see somebody with a big fist over their face. It's not just about that. So, a lot of times it's that psychological abuse, that emotional abuse, someone having control over you, having control over everything that you do, from, maybe you work every week and you have to bring the paycheck home and turn it over and you get a little allowance out of your own paycheck, or little things like that, where if you go shopping and everything is counted to the penny, you have to show receipts, that economic abuse, the financial abuse. There's sexual abuse and sexual coercion. I always say, I'm a product of that because I had 6 kids in 7 years. When I was with my ex-husband, I had 2 sets of twins and 2 singles. So within 7 years, I had 6 kids and I escaped with twins. Not my last set of twins, because I had 4 more kids. So now I have 10 kids. But I always said, I'm a product of that because I was pregnant, barefoot pregnant in the kitchen it really happens. And that was me. So, controlling you with sexual violence, maybe having you do things you don't want to do. Maybe you want to have sex, but you don't want to do it that way. Right? There's all different types of that. And it is all under power and control. That's what domestic violence is. In New Jersey, domestic violence is legally recognized in the following relationships, which is what we just talked about when I talked about a TRO, a temporary restraining order. So family members, dating relationship, co-parents, roommates, past or present, could be your college roommate. That's, if you have an issue with your college roommate, you can get a restraining order against them. You can go to the next slide. So this is the power and control wheel, which is pretty much, this is what I like to use with my clients, because they may say, oh no, I'm not, I'm not in a relationship. I'm not in domestic violence. He just has anger issues, or, I just need him anger management. Is there anger management? And I always say, no. I mean, there's anger management, but people that have anger issues, right? They don't just go, they actually go around and they're angry with everybody, right? They're angry with the crossing guard. They're angry with, the people at work. They're angry. They're just angry in general. But batterers, abusers, they focus their anger, right, on specific people, the people who will forgive them, the people who love them. That's who they focus their anger on. And that's the difference between a batterer and someone with an anger issue. So when clients like to tell me that, like, I just want to get him angry. No, that's not, he needs to go to the batterers intervention program, because they're going to focus directly on being an abuser. Whereas anger management, that's completely different. I had actually someone ask me today at a diner when she heard me talking about domestic violence. She said, well, I just, is there family counseling that, do you know family counseling that we can all go to? Me, him, and my 16-year-old son. And I said, honestly, we never refer to family counseling for abusers and for the family, because if you think about it, if you've ever done counseling or marriage counseling, you're sitting in a room. Do you think it's going to be fair? Do you think the victim is going to be able to really talk about how they feel and really talk about what's happening when the abuser is sitting right next to them, and you have to go home with that person? Right? You have to go home with them. So anything you say in this confidential space with this counselor is going to be taken out on you later, because they don't think that they really did all that stuff to you. Usually abusers are manipulators, they're narcissists. The world revolves around them, and they think everything that happens is your fault. Like, I was late for work, it's your fault. Or, well, you wouldn't have that black eye if you wouldn't talk back to me. I wouldn't have had to punch you in your face, right? So they want to put all of their problems, everything, anything that's wrong in their life, it's your fault. Thank you, Claire. You're awesome. So the power and control wheel, just to run through this, I always start with using isolation. This is a power and control wheel is pretty much universal, right? They have ones for all different types. There's an LGBTQ power and control wheel. There's one for different religions, different race. There's ones for the elderly. If you want to find one specifically for maybe your client, really, you can look it up and I'm sure it's there. This is universal. As you can see, the dark outside line of this circle, it says physical violence or sexual violence, because that does not always have to happen in that relationship. Like I told you earlier, it could be anything, any of these. These are all tactics that an abuser can use to keep that power and control over you, to keep you pretty much under their thumb. And I always start with using isolation, because that's a way that someone can keep control over you without you even know it's happening, right? Like, oh, my husband, he got this great job. It's, 5 hours away and I'm really going to miss my family, but, he's going to be making more money. And I don't like that the house is really far out and it's kind of in the woods, but, but it's good for the family. So I'm going to do it. So not only has that abuser isolated you away from your family, your friends, the people that are like, no, don't do it, he's a bad guy. He's also isolated you in a home where you don't know anybody, you don't really have friends, and you're kind of like secluded in the woods. So that's the ultimate isolation. Now they can also isolate you in your house, right? They can ignore you. That's the worst, is giving you that, the silent treatment. They can isolate you. Maybe you want to go out with your friends, but your friends don't like your spouse, your partner. So your friends will stop inviting you out because your partner's a jerk, right? So that's kind of isolating you away from your friends in a way that, oh yeah, then that your partner got what they wanted. Now your friends don't even invite you out. But it's the easiest thing to get away with. If you move up the power and control wheel using emotional abuse, I'm sure you guys can use your imagination how to emotionally abuse somebody, calling them names, making them think they're crazy, which we always say is like crazy making, like, what? I didn't say that. I don't know what you're talking about. Whereas, start making you second guess. Wait a minute, am I going crazy? I know that I told him I have a doctor's appointment and he needs to take the kids to, dance class, but he's saying I never said it, but I said it and I wrote it on the calendar, but now it's erased off the calendar, to start making those people think they're crazy. Gaslighting them, going through like, you guys know about gaslighting. It's really crazy making. Using intimidation. So like, I'm going to go kill or I'm going to kill you, or using like, a lot of times you'll see the hole in the wall, right? I hear it from a lot of officers when they arrive on scene, they can tell if it's a DV house. They can tell if it's an abusive house, because if there's holes in the walls, if some doors are broken, things like that, it's all intimidation tactics. And that's how a lot of officers arrive on scene. Everybody can say, no, nothing's wrong, but they can see that there's destruction in the house. They like, if they have weapons, they can display them, by having them out cleaning their guns. One man always cleaned his gun every day. Why are you going to clean your gun every day? But he would bring it all out on the table and let her know, like, I have these guns, you better not mess with me. Abusing the pets. We're all adults here, so I can tell you some scary stories, but I'll tell you, in Camden County, I had a abuser who my client walked out to take her kids to school, and the family kitten was mutilated right out front of the door. So they all went to run out front, and it was just sitting right there. Another one took the family dog and hung it above his son's bed. So when his son woke up, who was only 6, the dog was hung above the bed. So abusing the pets also keeps that family in line, also keeps everybody to know, like, I'm not going to mess up, because that could be me, right? It's intimidation. Coercion and threats. I always say there's like 3 things to domestic violence, right? There's episodic episodes where it just happens one time. Maybe they've been married for 40 years, it happens one time. There's mutual combat, where they might fight together all the time. It's not, they may sometimes, an officer should say, well, they're both beating the heck out of each other. That doesn't mean it's not abuse. It doesn't mean that there's something bad happening in an unhealthy relationship. But the third one is coercion. And that's usually what happens in a domestic violence relationship, is there's coercing you to do something you don't want to do. Threatening you all the time, threatening suicide. A lot of them like to, like, oh, if you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. So victims will stay because they don't want to have your death on their hands. Let's say using economic abuse. I talked about that a little bit earlier, like, putting them on an allowance. Or if maybe you're home for 10 years raising kids and you have to ask that partner for money, because you don't have any. And, even though you do everything in the home and you work and you clean and, that's a harder job than anything else, but you still have to ask for money, even to buy the kids shoes. Using male privilege is kind of outdated, but it does happen. Acting like, I'm the man of the house. I'm the king of the castle. You do everything I say, because that's that's what it says in the Bible, or, you know, that's what it says you're supposed to do. You have to follow what I say. I'm the bigger breadwinner. And using children. So, you know, making them feel guilty, telling the kids, like, tell mommy I said this. Sometimes when the victims finally leave, which we all know in the first 2 weeks is the most dangerous time, because that's usually where you see murder suicidal in the news. Like, oh my God, of course, if you see it happen. And then I'm always just like, was it a DV, or did they have a relationship? Yes, they did. Or it's the murder. It's the most dangerous time is in the first 2 weeks of leaving that relationship. And a lot of times when victims leave, sometimes dads or, you know, the other parent will be like, oh, I bought the kids new iPads. Well, yeah, that's great. So first of all, you're trying to make yourself look like you know, you're all that because you can afford to buy the kids all this new stuff. But then the abuser also has a little tracking thing in those iPads. So they can also watch where the victim's going, you know, and always knows what's going on at all times, because now they're, you know, they're using the kids to find out where the other parent is. You know, and what they also like to do is call DCP&P and always report things, usually false accusations. But, you know, I know DCP&P always has to follow up, obviously for safety, but it is also a way to control that victim, and, you know, always have somebody on their back, not just them, but now I'm going to call the cops. I'm going to call DCP&P. I'm going to tell your whole family that I think you're an unfit parent. I'm going to let them all know that I think you're going through postpartum and you're crazy, and we should all gather together and help you. And then minimizing, denying, and blaming is, you know, it's kind of what I was talking about earlier, like with the gaslighting, you know, making it seem like, you know, you don't know what you're talking about. And again, I'm not responsible for all of this. It's your fault because you're the one who caused it. If you didn't do that, I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't have had to put my hands on you. Does anybody got any questions about the power and control wheel, or it's pretty self-explanatory? Okay, next slide. So survivors options or other options. Are we in the right slide?
Yes.
I can talk about that.
Okay.
So right to a sexual assault forensic exam. So if that goes on with what Alethea was talking about, so if they have been sexually assaulted and they report it, they go to the hospital, it's their right to have that exam. And it's also the right to file a police report. Right to an advocate at any and all legal encounters. So like I said, at municipal courts, superior courts, a SASPA or a TRO or FRO. So a TRO is the temporary restraining order, and FRO is the final that you get afterwards, which I talked about. Now the SASPA is a sexual assault restraining order. So remember those things I talked about. To get a temporary, you need a relationship and an act. So the SASPA, you know, you don't need a relationship. There has to be an act. So it could be your neighbor's uncle, you know, when you were visiting. So you don't have that relationship. You don't live in the home, you know. So this is a restraining order that will cover you without that, the relationship happens. This restraining order covers you in the same sense as what we talked about, the TRO and FRO for sexual assault victims. Strangulation response. Are we talking about the response team or?
Yes.
Okay, so this is not in every county, but there is a new strangulation response. So if somebody comes to the hospital, sometimes they may go to the police department and they don't want to report it, or they don't want to go to the hospital. And it is their right. But if they are strangled, choked, whether it's by the arm, by the hands, could be a cord, I always encourage the victim to go to the hospital and just get a CAT scan. Let's just make sure you're okay. You know, is there a blood clot? It could take the pressure, a little of a pressure of like a light handshake around your throat to make a cut in your carotid artery, which could cause a blood clot. And I'm sure you guys know that, which could go to your brain and you could die, right? So just to be on the safe side, how about if you just go to the hospital and get checked out? So now they have a strangulation response team where the same nurse, who is the forensic nurse, will do the assessment with you. They'll go through all the questions with you. So even though the same nurse usually responds to the sexual assault, now they're also responding at the hospital to the strangulation response. So they'll be able to go through all the questions with you and give you resources, and also call a volunteer. We could be there too. Victim impact statement is what you give if you so if there's a case against someone, against your abuser, you can write a victim impact statement. And that is something you can read in court if the perpetrator is being sentenced. You can, because that kind of is before the sentencing. So the judge has to, the judge can either read it for you if you don't want to be there, or you can read it, and it kind of weighs in on the judge's decision of that sentencing. There was a couple of things that I did want to mention before my time's up, is that the victim does not have to file a police report, right? They don't have to get a restraining order, but New Jersey is mandated. So the officers are mandated to arrest if they show up and the victim has injuries. So if there's signs of injuries, they're usually going to arrest the person that's in the room that doesn't have signs of injury, or if the victim says that's the person that did it. Or if they have probable cause, if it's just like, well, the victim's not saying anything, but it's her and it's him and she's all beat up, that's probable cause for that the officer would say, well, there's enough evidence here for me to say you're the one that did it. I'm going to take you to station. And the second one is complain of pain. So if they don't have any signs of injury, which usually if you're strangled, you don't have signs of injuries at first, it could show up tomorrow, the next day, it might not even show up, marks around the neck, or petechiae in the eyes, or bruising, or in the face. But if the victim says, oh, my arm hurts, he shoved me up against the wall and there's no mark here, but she complained of pain, then the officer is mandated to arrest. So signs of injury or complain of pain. New Jersey is a mandated state to arrest. But if there's none of that, and the victim is just like, no, nothing happened. It's really the officer's discretion at that moment. The victim could come into the station and say, well, he keeps harassing me. The hardest things to prove are harassment and stalking. But the stalker is the one that scares me the most, because the stalker is the one that does not care about that piece of paper of the restraining order, right? They're the ones that, will follow you, will cyber stalk you, find out where you're going, what you're doing, put trackers in your cars, do all kinds of stuff. They're the ones that scare me the most, because they're unpredictable. And usually that's the crazy one. What's the next slide?
Other options. Let me see.
More options. Yeah. So sometimes if a victim doesn't want to get a restraining order, because when you get a restraining order against someone, that person could lose their license. So say they're a therapist, a nurse, a doctor, a hairstylist, an architect, a medical assistant, anything that you need to have a license to do your job, a cop. If you get a final restraining order against you, you can lose your license and then your career is gone. So if we have some victims that are, a police officer's spouse, and they don't want their partner to lose their career, because then they won't get child support, they won't get alimony or anything. So then they may do civil restraints. And civil restraints is pretty much your lawyers get together and say, hey, I'm gonna, you both are gonna stay away from each other. And, here's your visitation time, and this is it, you sign a civil restraint. It doesn't really have teeth, right? A restraining order has teeth. A restraining order can, give the officer the right. So if somebody violates a restraining order, which could mean they call them, they come by the house, they get a friend to say, hey, tell her I said I love her. I don't care what the message is. It could be, I'm going to kill you. It could be, I love you. You're getting a third person to relay a message to that victim that a restraining order is in place. You are violating the restraining order. Text message, email, Facebook message, IG, it doesn't matter. Or a third person. You cannot communicate or have someone communicate for you to that victim. That's a violation. But I always tell the victims, it's up to you to report it. So nobody's sitting there waiting, like watching your, Instagram and stuff or anything like that. You have to go report it to the police department, bring all your proof, always bring your proof, and you have to report it. And then it's up to the officer, once you report it, to go and make that arrest. like I said, harassment and stalking is always hard to prove because usually these manipulators are very good. The abusers are very smart. They know what they're doing. And, you know, you can't, some people would be like, oh, they, you know, he's so stupid. No, they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. They're mastered at it. But, and then these are all other options. You know, there's the VINE system, victim notification system. So if there is arrest and that person does go, you know, either to county or, you know, there's an assessment that the officers do when I'm sorry, not the victim, the perpetrator is arrested. And the victim will leave the police department with this, I think it's yellow or pink piece of paper, and it'll be usually your last 4 numbers of your social security. So when that person is either transferred or being let out of jail, this VINE system, it's an automated system. It'll call the victim and it'll call you until you get just irritated, like it's a bill collector, like I gotta pick up this phone. It's the VINE system telling you, hey, Joe Schmo is being let out of Camden County Jail, you know, today at 12 o'clock. Basically, prepare yourself, right? Like, prepare yourself, he's getting let out. Which it is in place because of something that happened, which was a murder, and, you know, they didn't let him know. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Okay, I just
want
want
to wait. VCCO, can I cover that? Okay, so that's my biggest resource is victim of crime compensation, VCCO. So this is through the Attorney General's office, and like I said, it's my biggest resource that I give people because finances is one of the biggest barrier that keeps people in a relationship or even just in the home because it's expensive to live in New Jersey, right? So I can't leave. I can't afford a security deposit, first month's rent. I don't know, you know, I need money. Well, VCCO can help you with that. It's a program through the AG's office, and you need either a restraining order or you need a police report. So you have to be cooperating with the police, right? Restraining order or police report. Claire is on it. She's putting all the links inside there. And what VCCO can do, the best things that I always tell the victims, like they'll give you a checklist, like fill out the application online. It's easier. It goes straight to them. They'll pretty much email you right away, say, hey, thank you. You know, here is your case number and somebody's going to contact you, blah, blah, blah. Or fax it, either email or fax it. Don't snail mail it. Like get it in there quick so you can get your case number and somebody will start working on it fast. There's a checklist, like 2 pages of checklist. I tell my clients, check as many things as you want, you know, like let them decide you qualify or don't qualify. Don't question it. Just whatever you think you want on there. Now they help relocation funds. That's huge. I think it's up to $3,000 right now. It may have gone up again, but security deposit, first month's rent, your moving truck. They don't give it directly to the victim, but they give it to where they want to move. You know, or the security or the, you know, moving truck, like they will pay the direct person. So that's relocation. They also loss of earnings. So if you lost any time at work because of domestic violence, or if he's, you know, you got fired or you had to quit your job because he wouldn't take care of the kids, you know, it's all because of domestic violence. And you can show this is how much I used to make. You have to show proof, but they will reimburse you for loss of earnings, loss of support. So if he did pay some of the bills or half the bills, or the abuser, the spouse, the partner paid some of the bills or stuff in the home, and now they're not there because of domestic violence, that's loss of support. Now, again, you have to show proof. So like you could have is maybe you guys filed taxes together last year, or if you have some old check stubs laying around the house. Sometimes I'll tell the victims like, all right, you got, you know, hurry up and look around the house for check stubs. You know, you're going to want this when I tell you about VCCO. So loss of support, loss of earnings. They can also help with any medical bills. So maybe your insurance doesn't cover everything and you have medical bills. They can help with that. They can help with therapy, and that can even be long-term out. So like say you're like, I'm okay now, but 5 years from now, I need help. But you apply for it now. 5 years from now, you're like, yeah, I just got a new relationship and I got PTSD. I can't shake it. What happened to me before? They can help you with therapy, with paying for a therapist. And then also lawyer fees. So when we talked earlier about, you know, South Jersey Legal and LS&J, things like that, VCCO can help with lawyer fees. Everything is up to a certain amount, right? And the umbrella used to be $25,000 6 months ago. I don't know if it went up again, but everything has a certain amount under it. I know personally, my daughter is getting counseling and she still has a huge bucket, and she's been in counseling for a year, and they send you these invoices like, you still have 12,500 worth of, you know, of counseling money left. I'm like, okay, that's great. The counselor's like $150 an hour, whereas in real life I do have state insurance, and I would get the counselors like South Jersey Behavior or something, where you got to wait to get in. So you also get good therapy, good counselors. And for the attorneys, there are attorneys that do accept VCCO. And if anybody wants to know, like, there's certain ones that are through Rutgers and stuff that accept VCCO. And now they didn't just add where the attorney will go for the restraining order court date. If you want to get a divorce, or if you have a child custody, they'll now help cover that. VCCO didn't used to do that, but now they help cover the child custody and the divorce, which is really big, because, you know, I can get anybody to go with me to court for a restraining order, but, you know, the divorce and the child custody, that's a lot of money. And you know, usually lawyers are like, no, we won't do it. But now there's lawyers that I know, I'm sure I can share with everybody, that accept VCCO and will cover you and go to court with you. Did I cover everything on there?
Yeah, so I just want to also mention, you know, particularly for survivors of sexual violence, you know, these options are great, but they don't work for everyone. And so going through that legal system, you know, it's not the best option for every survivor. There is a civil lawsuit. They did just up the statute of limitation on that, but, you know, that is another form of seeking accountability. So that, along with the restraining orders, which are also civil, right? They're not criminal proceedings, which in a criminal proceeding, you have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this violence happened, which is not always easy. Whereas the restraining order, the civil lawsuit, is a preponderance of the evidence. So, you know, I think it's a stigmatized form of accountability, but, you know, it can be helpful for some survivors, especially because they might be experiencing all this economic hardship along with their victimization. And then the other thing, if you're not aware, is Section 8 does have an emergency transfer option if people need to leave their home due to domestic violence or sexual violence. They're able to, you know, transfer that voucher and move.
There's also protection to end a lease, even if you're not in Section 8. And so if you can document that the reason you're leaving is because of a violent situation, you can't be penalized for that. You have to be released from your lease within 30 days. And I think you have to get your security deposit back too.
You do. You do, but they can take out if there's damage to the home, or if you owe back rent, they can take that out as security deposit. That's under the New Jersey Fair Housing Law for domestic violence, and LSNJ will help people with that if needed. Is that everything under DV?
I think that's it. I think. Oh, and then just as far as the sexual assault forensic exam, which Danielle did cover, but that is a free service. A person has up to 5 days after the assault to get this done. And basically, you know, they're administering preventative medications, and then also, you know, collecting DNA evidence and collecting a statement. They're able to go through this process without contacting law enforcement in case they ever want to pursue legal charges. They will hold the kit for 5 years with that evidence for 5 years. And then the survivor has that amount of time to decide if they want that to go to the police. Other than that, you know, just reiterating, the best way of supporting someone is, again, you can offer information, but not any opinions. We want to emphasize someone's control in how they heal from their victimization. We have coalitions. If you're interested, there's the contact information. If you know anyone who wants to volunteer, you could either call the hotline or contact Danielle, our social media. And then these are the hotlines for our program, and then also different ones in the state.
I'm wondering if, so I'll be presenting on violence prevention, but that's kind of shifting gears. And I want to make sure that people get a chance to ask questions, especially for the way that sexual violence and domestic violence might come up when you're working with clients. And so I'm thinking we could do questions about that specifically right now, as long as I start my part of the presentation by 2:10 or 2:15, I can consolidate that. But I really want to make sure that we're able to answer questions about how are you seeing these things show up in your work? Do you have questions about best practices or just anything that we can be helpful with along those lines? And I want to make sure that we have those conversations. So,
And Claire, I'm going to pause the recording so that people can be more comfortable talking.
Yes. And do you have, can you change the settings so I'm allowed to share a PowerPoint?
Yes.
Perfect. And let me see. Can you see my screen and nothing that isn't the PowerPoint? Perfect.
Yes.
So this is kind of how I think of like the breakdown of services that SERV offers. And in Camden, I'm responsible for violence prevention. There's a preventionist in each county. So we have services which are really like in the moment of crisis, as we've been talking about. So that's about reducing the short-term impact of trauma, connecting people to immediate resources they need. So that's accompaniment, our hotline and chat, safety planning, safe housing. We have sort of longer term survivor care, case management, counseling, and things like that. And then every county in New Jersey has at least one person in the sexual and domestic violence field who's working on prevention. And so prevention is, the idea is that we're able to get out of this constant model of crisis response, responding to violence after the fact, helping people who are already in the situation, and devote some of our limited resources to trying to create culture change, trying to reduce the possibility that somebody is going to commit violence. So prevention is focused on working with people who could eventually become perpetrators, who could commit harm. And so the standards for prevention are that you would do multiple sessions with people who've not yet experienced or committed violence. I think that part of it is, I don't know if it's wishful thinking. I work mostly in middle schools and high schools, and I don't think it's possible to find a space in this country where somebody has not yet been impacted in some way by gender-based violence, by relationship violence, right? So we know that those things have already impacted people, but what we're trying to do is invite people to build up a skill set, to think about their commitments, to be able to pursue the kinds of relationships they want to have, right? One of my commitments is that young people in particular don't want to cause harm, don't want to be harmed. And the ways that we model interacting, the kind of traumas that pass on through families, all of these things can interrupt their ability to do that. And so that's what we're thinking with violence prevention. It uses a public health approach. So I can share this. And is it doing the thing where part of the screen is blacked out because I can see your faces? Here, I'll do this. So this is kind of the model that we use, is we think that, and this is related in some ways to the power and control wheel that Danielle shared, right? When we think about violence, often we're thinking about only sort of the peak of this pyramid, where an incident of heightened violence or overt violence happens, whether that is something that results in death, whether it's physical assault, whether it's something like stalking, all of these we would consider as violence. The public health approach is committed to looking at what is going on in our culture more generally that allows those instances of violence to happen, which makes them more likely, which makes it more difficult for people to be held accountable for them, right? So it's looking not at that peak of individual acts of violence that have happened, but what are these root causes? And the CDC, Center for Disease Control, has done research to identify, right, what are some of these root causes of sexual violence, of intimate partner violence, various kinds of interpersonal violence. What we know, and this is because of that, right, what is going on with sexual violence or with domestic violence is not about desire, it's not about anger or jealousy, right? These are explanations that perpetrators give. It is about establishing that power and control over the victim, and all of the institutions and systems in our country that create those power differentials then can become sites for people to exploit that differential and use it as an occasion for violence. And so we know across, right, anyone can experience sexual violence, anyone can experience domestic violence, but if we look at how frequently they occur, we know that people who are marginalized in multiple ways are more likely to be targeted by perpetrators because there already is that power differential. So that means that there are a lot of things that sort of historically we've thought of as primary prevention or as prevention, or that have been part of the violence against women movement that don't fit that standard of how with the public health approach we're thinking about prevention. Examples include what we're doing right now, right? Right now, we're really at that level of survivor care, making sure that there is a sense within the community of where the resources are, where to go, that we understand what sexual and domestic violence are. There are also things that are community building events. So right this week, right now it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we're participating in a number of Take Back the Night events, other things that allow survivors to connect to each other, again, get that information out there. And finally, and often people will think of this, there's risk reduction. And so that could include a self-defense class, or you can buy things to test for if your drink has been drugged, right? Various practices telling people not to go out at night. Risk reduction leaves in place or accepts the fact that there's going to be a certain amount of violence in the community and is giving people tools that are, the idea is that you can reduce your personal risk of being the one that is victimized, but they don't do anything to change the fact that that violence is occurring, right? So it's sort of one by one trying to pull ourselves out of the system of violence, but stop short of that community level intervention. You know, this 1 second. So if we think about what's going on with prevention compared to risk reduction, which I think is the thing that it's most often confused with, really we're trying to shift the responsibility for violence and preventing violence from either the potential victim or even the perpetrator to the community, and looking at the spaces that we exist in, what we tolerate in those spaces, what resources are available, what those kinds of stereotypes or models of, right, how do we think about gender? How do we think about what a healthy relationship is? What have we learned from our parents, from the media about how to treat one another? And really trying to intervene at that level and give, especially young people, the tools to lead healthy relationships, because those tools are not, right, we don't get them at birth. It's a struggle for everyone to figure out how they interact with other people, what it is to be respectful, what it is to communicate around consent. And a lot of the standard information that we have around that is really bad, is actually things that lead to the normalization of violence rather than things that promote equitable, respectful relationships. I'm gonna skip past this. So what we're looking at with violence prevention is risk and protective factors. This is used across any public health model, right? A risk factor is a characteristic that makes it more likely that somebody will commit violence. A protective factor makes it less likely for them to commit violence. There's a really cool tool from the CDC, which I'll share, where you can look at a variety of kinds of community violence, right? So bullying, sexual harassment, racist attacks, or other forms of oppression, and see what are the common root causes across each of those different kinds of victimization. And the risk factors for perpetration, this is specifically for sexual violence. There's a ton of overlap, as you might imagine, with domestic violence or any kind of interpersonal violence. A lot of the curriculums that we have are looking at either the individual level or the societal level. But it's broken into these different sort of ways that we can look at what is going on in our community. So at the individual level, Risk factors for someone who might commit violence include toxic or hypermasculinity. That's a specific model of masculinity, right? This is not masculinity in general. We know that men are more likely to commit every form of violence, but within that group, right, there are certain ways of thinking about masculinity, especially tying it directly to dominance or entitlement to certain behavior from women that are highly predictive of violence. Poor education and modeling around empathy. And so people who self-report low levels of empathy are more likely to perpetrate violence. Open hostility towards women, coercive sexual fantasies, adherence to traditional gender roles, or rape myth acceptance, right? And those are often repeated at that relationship level where even if you don't personally hold those, if your peer group does, that makes committing violence more likely. At the community level, these are things it would be great to be able to change, but often we as service providers don't have the ability to fix income inequality in our communities, but that is something that makes violence more likely. Community sanctions, the institutional support. Do people trust these institutions that if I call about a domestic violence case, someone's going to show up, someone's going to take me seriously, that they're going to do that no matter what my identity is, if I fit that standard picture of violence that they have. And so, like I said, for the programs that we're often either at the individual level or the social level. That social level includes things like regular or normalized media prediction of violence, social norms that uphold male superiority and female inferiority, weak laws, or right societal norms. I'm going to stop sharing here and just sort of see if anybody has any questions about this. So we have 2 curriculums that we use with middle and high school students that are around these different kinds of ideas, give people a space to talk about what's going on in their relationships, what's going on in their sexual lives, their emotional lives, in order to try and intervene with, right, so things that I see really commonly that because of the work that we do, like Danielle, I'm like just immediately like red flag, really common for teens right now to share all of their social media passwords as soon as they start dating someone. Really common to think that if you're in a straight relationship, neither person is to have any friends of the same gender because that person is potentially someone that they're going to cheat on you with. And so I think a lot of the time that I'm working with young people, a lot of the interventions are around, right, like, how are you thinking about jealousy? Can you see how trying to control somebody else's behavior in order to affect your own, right, sense of vulnerability, your sense of jealousy is isolating them? Can you see, right, these unhealthy relationship habits in this behavior, even if that's not how you intend them or that's not how you think of yourself? And so a lot of the work is right around that. I think jealousy and insecurity are things that are very healthy human things that anyone might experience, and then can be used as a justification, especially when it's generally socially accepted, right? So this is like almost every one of my students thinks that these are normal behaviors. No one's told them they're not normal behaviors. Nobody's talked with them about how do you, right, differentiate between something not going well in a relationship and something that's abusive, like, right? And so, yeah, the entire purpose of the prevention is that work with young people. We also have a coalition. Each county has a violence prevention coalition that's trying to unite people who are doing this kind of work, give them connections to each other, give them resources. So does anybody have any questions about what we're doing on this side of things? I think what it looks like for you all, working with clients, working with families, if it is possible for you, if you see this in a family, to think about safe ways to just try and check that behavior. And that might look different ways, because I know that, right, and this happens for us, our work on the hotline too, where some of our clients are, right, have less than informed opinions around race or around gender or whatever it is. It can be really hard and might not always be appropriate to correct that thing in the moment because your responsibility is to the client. But knowing that those attitudes or biases, especially for people who are parents who are passing those on, are contributing to this general cultural sense of, right, where violence is more common. And so figuring out when and how, whether that's in your personal life or your professional life, you have the opportunity to model some bystander intervention, to ask people questions, to point out when people are generalizing from, right, one person who treated you away to everyone of that gender, everyone of that race, right? All of those things are important ways to bring about this culture change. Yeah, and that's all I have on that.
It's fabulous. I'm going to stop recording again just in case anybody wants to ask questions.